Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks for the invitation for being here today. So my name is Gemma Ginty, and I'm from a company called Future Cities Catapult, and our role is to advance urban innovation and to grow UK businesses. We're part of a team, very multidisciplinary team of architects, service designers, technologists, data scientists. And in that kind of new design team, we do projects that bring together academia, cities, and businesses to address the big challenges that are facing our cities. So when I was thinking about what I could share with you today in terms of how smart cities are evolving, I thought about, maybe you can answer this question. Have you ever been in a situation where you've had a really interesting conversation and it gets stopped by someone saying, "That's a great question"? And the problem is when someone says it's a great question, we can't necessarily find the solution, so we have to gather up these great questions. So I thought today it would be a good way to share with you some of the questions that we've been thinking about in the Future Cities Catapult and that's driving us to, I suppose, unleash or unlock some of the potential of this new reality and transformative technologies. So I like to quote this great British architect, Cedric Price, when he said, "Technology is the answer, but what is the question?" And I think oftentimes the first iteration of the smart cities was technology looking for a solution. Big companies saw the mass market of cities and they wanted to sell their platforms. And this, I suppose, was the emergence of the smart city. It wasn't necessarily addressing the great challenges of cities. So the questions that I thought, when I started to compile some questions for you, of course I had a long list of 50 questions, which wouldn't really be succinct enough for today's talk. But I thought it would be useful to share in these kind of 6 topics in terms of the vision of a city, how you manage it, the tools you use, the cost, more importantly, and how it relates to the people that are using the cities. So the first one is on the vision. And I think this is really important in terms of why cities should have this big, audacious goal. I think the challenge is sometimes if they don't have a vision, then it becomes a series of pilots or test beds that don't really interact or create those cross-sector opportunities. At the Catapult, we did a review of 25 worldwide cities to understand what was their state of play, why were they developing strategies, because I suppose smart cities have been in development for the past 10 years. What we found was that cities had several different approaches. The first was that it was a top-down approach to create more efficiency in cities, to create more control, to create more better use of the assets that they had. There was also the approach of the bottom up in terms of creating more empowerment for citizens, relating to that kind of crowdsourcing and creating an environment for innovation. But like I said, if there isn't a big vision or a big audacious goal, cities won't be able to take the opportunities that smart cities relate to. So why do we even need a smart city? So like I said, the technology companies kind of came with the kind of new platforms, but we also have a new building material in cities. So my background is an architect, and the traditional materials are glass and steel and concrete, and there is a very long tradition in the construction industry of using these materials very well. But we have a new building material, and it's data. And we have to understand how we can manage this, how we can use it to inform insights in cities, how we can make better decisions in terms of how we actually make better use of the resources we have. The other trends, as you probably know, is that there's more people living in cities as there ever was before. And we also have challenges that are much more systemic. So if you think about air quality in our cities, who do we blame? Or who has to resolve it? Is it the mayor in the city? Is it the health department? Is it transport? Is it planning? It's all of these things. And we need tools to come together to look at these system challenges. And I think the great Madeleine Albright, who was Secretary of State in the US, summed up the situation we're in now, where she said, we're taking 21st century challenges, or evaluating them with 20th century ideas and responding with 19th century tools. And I think we shouldn't be in a position where we're creating tools to prop up an outdated form of government. the smart city allows us to rethink how governance in cities works and to respond to the new reality we're facing. So if we think about the vision and then we think about the management, the operating plan for the city, what is the skills that's needed? So we recently did a project on the future of planning. So this is the planning, I suppose, your planning permissions. And this is, I suppose, an industry that has not experienced enormous digitization. It's still very analog. We still put laminated bits of paper on our lampposts and hope that this is a good communication tool in our cities. So we've set the challenge to the developer community and said, well, these are the challenges that the planning system is facing. How would you resolve these? So we did an open call, and we got a lot of solutions of how you could use the data and think about creating a better city information model that actually decisions you're understanding the impact of planning. And I think it goes back to what Richard Miller said this morning about what are the impact of our built environment and how can we know that it's working better for us. So this quotation is actually a few years old, and I think when I first, smart cities, when the Future Cities Catapult got set up 4 years ago, we were talking about this in terms of Uber, the world's largest taxi company, owns no vehicles, Facebook owns no content, Alibaba has no inventory, and Airbnb has no real estate. Something interesting is happening. And I think even that this was the reality 4 years ago, the reality is continually changing. And we have to remember that no solution is permanently right. And even we saw last week with Uber that even the disruptors are experiencing disruption. So we have to continually be agile in terms of how we think the solutions can suit our cities. So I'd like to bring you on just a kind of a future imaginative journey. So think about waking up in 2030. You're in your fully connected home. You have sensors that monitor your well-being and health. And then this morning, you're told to go for a data recalibration. That sounds pretty ominous, but you're picked up by your health autonomous vehicle and you're brought to the clinic as this is required by your health insurance. On the way to the clinic, because you're in your autonomous vehicle, you can get on with some work. So you connect to the satellites and you can see how your crops are doing in your outsourced farm and how the robots are processing your produce. You can decide it's time for harvest and make that instruction from your car. This is not science fiction. Many of these technologies are already in operation. I suppose the biggest technology is within agriculture. But this future is not evenly distributed. So if we want to think about how we create these systems in the future, what we have to put in place now, and is it the role of public or private to make that change? So if we go back to the tools and this kind of data challenge that we have, and I have to say, to be honest, it's easier to talk about data than to use it. I suppose a bit like music, you can listen to it and enjoy it, but I can't write it or read music. So similar to this, data needs specialists, it needs tools, it needs data scientists in order to unlock the meaning and make it visual for us. And I suppose with these tools, we made an exhibition called the London Control Room, and this is it was exhibited in the Royal Academy. And what we did is we brought together all the available data sets that was available to us in terms of water and city, density, traffic. And we put the citizen in the control room position in terms of they could make decisions about how green the city could be, how tall the buildings were, if they wanted employment close by. And then at the end of the process, they got their verdict of what the outcome of the city would be. And I think these kind of tools are very useful to get people to be real kind of co-creators in our cities rather than just being passive subjects of the city. So there's another project we're doing which is called the Digital Connector, which is bringing different data sets together in terms of making new recipes, as we call it, in terms of looking at challenges of obesity, transport challenges. But the problem also with these types of tools is the quality of the open data. It's not yet at a position where we say there's enough data of the quality and in real time. And it's yet to meet the messiness of human unpredictability and contextual challenges. So there is challenges with these tools. The next big question is always the cost. Is this a luxury for cities? Can they really afford to become completely instrumented so they're a sensing city? I suppose the challenge with cost is that it grounds the flights of fancy. And it brings us to the decision of, I suppose, who will be the main beneficiaries of these types of smart cities? And will they have the impact that we desire in terms of, reducing resources and creating better use of our cities? Another pertinent question of who will own the future. I think this morning there were discussions about having a £1,000 phone and how scandalous this could be. In the future, phone companies won't want you to own a phone. They'll want you to rent a phone. And the future is about renting these services because the resources are too costly in terms of the materials that go into the phone, that actually they're buying mines and forests and in terms of being able to own these future assets. So the future will be about renting and leasing. And also there's a greater interest in the Internet of People than the Internet of Things, because people's behaviors are more interest to people in terms of how they can sell new products. So it brings us to the key point of the role of people in cities. And this is, I suppose, is an old quotation as well, but I think it sums up really well how we should be relating to people in cities. And it says, everyone has an invisible sign hanging from their neck saying, make me feel important. I have a value in this city, and make me, I suppose, never forget that message when working with people. And I think historically, smart cities have forgot this fundamental aspect, that they haven't found meaningful engagement with people. And I suppose they're catching up with businesses who have historically put the customer at their center of their business. Citizens now have to be at the center of this change. So can cities feel more personal? Can they give us a more rewarding and more responsive experience? And I think we've seen the trend in terms of becoming more personal with, I suppose, Alexa and having more voice control. And I suppose I was at a Smart City conference last week, and they said the future is voice. How can you have much more voice interaction in terms of how you interact with cities? But I'd like Alexa to do more than put on the radio in the morning. I would like her to help with some big goals I have. How could I become more zero carbon? Or how do I have better knowledge of civic information in my locality? And I think then voice control could have more meaning in our homes. It's also useful to reflect on who the users of the city will be. We've spoken about citizens, but the users could also be robots, could be drones, could be buildings, because they'll also be accessing the platforms of cities, asking for information and being controlled. And should they have the same rights to the city? Should there be a hierarchy of users in the cities? So it's just useful to think that it's not just the people who are the users of the cities. So then down to the testing, and I think this is where great concepts meet the reality. Like I said, as an architect, you'd always meet your reality when you get on site, and you have to meet the earth, the contractors, deadlines. And this is when smart cities really have to deliver in terms of their experience. Although they feel quite invisible, the services, they have to deliver the same utility and delight that we would expect from any other intervention in the city. So how will it all work? I think it's important to know that behind the scenes, there's so many interactions that have to happen to create these moments of simplicity. But there's also a danger of pilot sickness, as they call it. So many different pilots happening across the country and the world that are not having the ability to scale and have the impact that they need. And this is when bigger bets are needed to actually test the 5G centres, to get businesses to actually think about how they can deliver a service in the city and not just the public. So I come back to where I initially said that no solution is permanently right. We are at the foothills of an emerging industry. People are still trying to get to grips with what skills they need, the standards they need, the investment model. Who's going to pay for it? How will procurement work? But I think this is also a very exciting time, and it gives us an opportunity to shape what that future might be. Because I think The pursuit of a smart city is about creating a better city. And I think we're not alone in having this vision. So this is a quotation from over 100 years ago from the futurists, when they said, every generation must create their own city. And we are in the same position. Although we have extra technology that is available, we still have a responsibility to shape what is the type of city that we want to live in. So I've given you an overview of some of these seemingly simple questions, and I've really just touched the surface in terms of what is the need of a smart city, how do you manage it, the tools we need, the cost, does it feel simple? And I'm sure in this presentation you've got many other questions that come to mind that made you think, well, what does it mean for my everyday life and how will it be different? So I'm happy to take any questions from you to continue this debate so that we can collectively imagine what a better future city might be. Thank you very much.